There was once a king who abandoned his throne not because he was defeated, but because he wanted to see what lay beyond the edge of the known world. And that decision changed history. Not because he succeeded, but because he vanished. In the early 14th century, before Columbus, before European Atlantic empires, before the so-called Age of Discovery, the Mali Empire was already one of the most powerful states on Earth. Gold flowed from its mines into North Africa and beyond. Scholars debated law and astronomy in Timbuktu. Caravans crossed the Sahara-like moving cities. But inside that power structure lived a ruler who was not satisfied with maps. His name is rarely emphasized in mainstream narratives, Mansa Abu Bakr II, and according to oral tradition and some Arabic chroniclers, he made a decision that defied logic. He believed there was land beyond the Atlantic Ocean. Not speculation, belief. At a time when most of Europe feared falling off the edge of the sea, a West African emperor reportedly assembled a fleet. Not 10 ships, not 20, hundreds. The first expedition sailed west. Only one ship returned. Its captain reported strong currents pulling vessels into the ocean's grip. The rest never came back. For most rulers, that would have been enough. Not for him. He did something no emperor should ever do. He stepped down from the throne. He handed power to his successor. And he personally led a second, much larger expedition into the Atlantic. And he was never seen again. Think about that. An African emperor voluntarily left the most powerful gold empire in the medieval world to chase an idea beyond the horizon. No confirmed wreckage. No mass graves. No returning survivors. Just absence. And then silence. Why is this not discussed more often? Because if true, it challenges the timeline of Atlantic exploration. If an African fleet crossed, or even attempted crossing the Atlantic before, European exploration narratives began. It complicates the mythology of discovery. Now, let's stay grounded. There is debate. Historians argue over the scale, over the documentation, over interpretation. But here is what cannot be denied. The account exists. It was recorded by Al-Umari, an Arab historian who interviewed Mansa Musa in Cairo in 1324. Musa himself reportedly explained that he became ruler because his predecessor sailed away and never returned. That is not folklore alone. That is a diplomatic explanation from one emperor to another civilization. Now ask yourself, why would Musa invent that story in Cairo? What political advantage does that lie give him? None. It actually weakens perceived stability, which makes it more plausible. But here's where the psychological tension begins. If Abu Bakr's fleet vanished, where did it go? Ocean currents from West Africa naturally moved towards South America. Modern researchers have tested drift patterns. It is physically possible. Not proven, but possible. Now, imagine this scenario. Ships pushed by currents. Storms separating vessels. Some sinking. Some surviving. Some reaching unknown shores. And if even a fraction survived, what happened next? Did they integrate with local populations? Did they leave artifacts? Did they die anonymous in a foreign land? Or did they disappear into history because no one was looking for African sailors in pre-columbian narratives? There are controversial claims about linguistic overlaps, about certain artifacts, about oral traditions in parts of the Americas referencing visitors from the East. None conclusively proven, but none entirely erased either. Here's the deeper part. Whether the expedition reached land or not, the mindset matters. An African emperor was thinking globally, strategically, oceanically, at a time when Europe was still consolidating feudal systems. That alone recalibrates assumptions. But the mystery does not end there. When Musa took power, he did not reverse maritime curiosity. Instead, he shifted focus inward. He expanded trade, strengthened administration, projected wealth through spectacle. But one thing never happened. There was no official declaration of failure. No recorded memorial. No state narrative explaining the loss of hundreds of ships. Why? Because empires do not advertise uncertainty. They absorb it. They move forward. They let silence bury risk. Bakr's disappearance becomes one of the most unsettling political events in medieval African history. A king who left, a fleet that vanished, a possibility that history narrowed.
Now zoom out.
In the 15th century, Portuguese explorers began moving down the West African coast. They encountered advanced trade systems, structured states, naval knowledge. Did they hear stories of Western voyages? We do not know. But maritime culture in West Africa was not non-existent. River navigation was sophisticated. Ocean fishing communities existed. Shipbuilding techniques were not primitive improvisation. So when modern audiences assume Atlantic exploration began with Iberian ambition, they are repeating a simplified narrative. History rarely begins where textbooks place the starting line. Now, imagine the alternative. Imagine Abu Bakr's fleet never reached land. Imagine storms swallowed them. Imagine hundreds of ships lost in open ocean. That is still one of the boldest exploratory decisions in pre-modern history. Not conquest, not war. Exploration. Curiosity powerful enough to cost a throne. And then came the quiet. Centuries passed. European powers built their own Atlantic empires. The narrative of discovery solidified. Africa was repositioned as recipient rather than initiator. And Abu Bakr's voyage became a footnote, or dismissed, or labeled legend. But legends often form around events, too disruptive to integrate cleanly. And here's the uncomfortable layer. If African exploration preceded European arrival in the Atlantic, it destabilizes the moral architecture of later colonial justification. Discovery becomes relative. Ownership becomes complicated. Narrative supremacy weakens. So what survives? Fragments, oral memory, Arabic documentation, academic debate, ocean current simulations, and silence. History does not always disappear in flames. Sometimes it sinks. Now, imagine the emotional dimension. An emperor standing at the shore, wind tearing at sails, hundreds of vessels ready, the horizon endless, no guarantee of return. He steps onto a ship. He leaves power behind, not because he was exiled, not because he was defeated, but because he wanted to know. And the ocean answers with nothing. That image alone is cinema. But more than cinema, it is philosophy. It tells us something critical. African history is not only about resistance and survival. It is also about curiosity, ambition, risk, vision. Now ask yourself, why are we more familiar with the voyages of Columbus than with the disappearance of Abu Bakr II? One was documented extensively by emerging European powers. The other emerged from African and Arabic, records that were later deprioritized in Western academic emphasis. Visibility shapes memory. Memory shapes power. And power shapes what is taught. This is not about replacing one myth with another. It is about expanding the frame. Because once you widen the frame, you realize something unsettling. The world was already connected long before official narratives say it was. And Africa was not waiting at the edge of history. It was moving, sometimes forward, sometimes outward, sometimes into the unknown, and sometimes into silence. Abu Bakr may have died at sea. He may have reached another continent. We may never know. But what cannot be erased is this. An African emperor once gambled everything on the possibility that the horizon was not the end. And that changes how you read the map. Because if one king was thinking like that in the 1300s, what else have we underestimated? What other doors were opened and then quietly closed? What other voyages began and were never recorded properly? History is not only what returned, it is also what left and never came back. That's your 50-minute spine. Psychological, mysterious, global, not repetitive. Not Africa was rich. This one is. What if the first Atlantic mystery started in Mali?